All right. Good evening, everybody. I just wanted to let our members that are here know that we do not have a quorum this evening. I was informed rather last minute by several members that they would not be able to be here. And given that it's 6 o'clock and we're still missing people, safe to say we won't have a quorum either way. We are still going to move forward and have Dr. Dominguez do her presentation. What that means is we won't follow the agenda that was posted since we won't be having our meeting. What will happen instead is that Dr. Dominguez will do her presentation. We'll open it up to questions only. You'll not be able to have a discussion or share any thoughts that will lead to a full discussion of the board. We will also open it up to questions from members of the public if we have any that would like to ask questions. And for members of the public that are here this evening, we will not, because this is no longer an official meeting of the CAB, the questions and any comments that you provide after the presentation will not be entered into public record, since this is no longer an official meeting. With that being said, for our
Danielle, I'm so sorry if I may interrupt. I just want to also state that we do have interpretation services available during this meeting.
Yes, I was just getting to that.
Oh, sorry. Thank you.
No worries. Also for the host, we have one additional CAB member in the waiting room that needs to be promoted.
Thank you.
For members of the audience that need interpretation services, we do have an interpreter on hand this evening. Alejandro, would you like to go ahead and translate that for us?
Hola, mi nombre es Alejandro y soy el intérprete esta noche, y para la gente que necesite interpretación en español, por favor usen el símbolo que indica mundo en la parte de abajo de la pantalla, y ahí pueden acceder al canal que dice Spanish, español.
Perfect. Thank you very much. All right. And do we have the interpretation feature going right now? Co-host or host? Oh, perfect. There it is. Thank you. All right. With that, I will go ahead now and introduce Dr.
Actually, Danielle, I'd love, I'm sorry, but you made that announcement so appropriately, right, at 6 o'clock, and we still had a couple CAB members coming into this.
Sure.
They're unaware of what is now happening. I apologize for the interruption, but I would love for that announcement to be made again.
Sure.
At this point, if we have any other CAB members come in, I'll take it upon myself to message them in chat. But if we can just make the announcement as to what we're doing tonight, that'd be great.
Sure.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. For the CAB members that just joined us, thank you. We do not have a quorum this evening of the board. So we will not be holding our official CAB meeting. What will happen instead, since we have Dr. Dominguez with us this evening, we'll go ahead and have her present. You will be allowed at the end of the presentation to ask questions. However, we ask that you refrain from having any discussion amongst board members, as that will be a violation of the Brown Act. In addition to that, we will also allow members of the public who are attending this evening to ask questions and provide any comment that they would like. However, since it's no longer an official meeting of the board, we will not be entering any of that information into the official record. So with that, I will go ahead and introduce Dr. Dominguez. So this evening we have Dr. Daniela Dominguez here with us this evening to present on self and community care as an act of resistance. The presentation is on caring for the self, mentally and physically while engaged in community work. About Dr. Daniela Dominguez. Dr. Dominguez is an assistant professor at the University of San Francisco and the chief executive officer at On the Margins, LLC. She is a licensed psychologist and professional clinical counselor with a special interest in libertarian psychology, anti-racism, migrant justice, and gender and sexuality matters. Previously, her program of research has focused on understanding how Black, Indigenous, and people of color cope with stress and use specific strategies to draw upon resiliencies to achieve positive health. In 2020, the Society of Counseling Psychologists honored her with the Early Career Award for Distinguished Professional Contributions to Counseling Psychology. In 2021, the Society of Counseling Psychologists honored her with the Social Justice Award for her demonstrated evidence of achieving community change that supports disenfranchised or oppressed groups. And I also just want to add that I've had the privilege of hearing Dr. Dominguez speak at a previous event and totally loved everything that you presented on. And I'm super excited to have you here with us today. And now I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
And then can you see my presenter slides?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for having me here. I know that I'm presenting a little bit earlier, and so I will try to end at 7 o'clock because I definitely don't want to take more of your time than what we initially had talked about. But it's such a pleasure to be here with you today and to see familiar faces. And for those of you who I cannot see, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Daniela Dominguez, and I am an assistant professor at the University of San Francisco's Santa Rosa campus. I lead the Marriage and Family Therapy program. And also, as Neil was saying, I'm the chief executive officer at On the Margins. And so I am super excited to talk to you today. I do want to say, really sometimes at these presentations over Zoom, because I cannot be with you in the same way in which we're used to being in community. Please let me know if you have any questions in the chat box, and I will try to also speak slowly because I do know that there's interpretation happening. So today I'm going to be talking about self and community care as acts of resistance. And let's go ahead and just start. I want to start my presentation with one of my ancestors, Audre Lorde. And can you see her beautiful picture on the slides? After she was unfortunately diagnosed with cancer, she wrote in her book, A Burst of Light, about self-care as a political act, as a radical act of resistance. And so I'm grounding my presentation on her words, which I will share with you right now. For Audre Lorde, self-care was about preserving herself. And it was about self-preservation in a world that she believed and she could feel and she could experience, and quite accurately, that was hostile to her identity as a Black queer woman, a world that didn't want to see her for who she was. And so she made that very clear, and she shared it with us in her book by saying, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And her ideas about self-care have really inspired many in queer and feminist and movement circles. And I know that she has deeply inspired me. So I want to go ahead and just slow down and read that again because I find it so critically important. She said, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. So it's really interesting, right, that today we see the ways in which entire businesses have created complex marketing strategies that speak to self-care as the purchasing of beauty products. I don't know about you, but when I scroll through my Instagram, I'm bombarded by those messages about purchase this face mask, do this to lose weight, to look thinner, all of these beauty messages. And these messages are so prevalent to the point that some folks are now thinking that self-care is about purchasing products. And the fact that self-care has been co-opted by the beauty industry has actually contributed to $10 billion in this industry alone. So for Audre Lorde, her definition of self-care was really different, right? For her, caring for oneself was not about purchasing. It was not about capitalism. It was about race, gender, class, and social justice. So it was more than avocado toast and yoga mats and kale chips and face masks and all of that. For her, it was an act of taking care of herself for survival. So I want to ask you, you've heard me talk a little bit about Audre Lorde's definition of self-care, about the beauty industry's definition of self-care, but how do you define self-care? What does that look like for you? What do others, maybe friends, loved ones, colleagues, see you doing when you are self-caring? How do you actually feel? And that could be, how do you feel in your body, in your spirit, what's coming through your mind when you nourish yourself? What do you feel when you nourish yourself? When you turn to yourself, when you look inward? What would your loved ones notice about you that would let them know that you've actually been taking care of yourself? Even just a little bit more, right? What would we be noticing about you? The people in the Zoom gallery, that they get to see you, I don't know how often you meet, but what would let them know, my colleague has been self-caring. So throughout this presentation, I would love for you to think about your own engagement in self-healing processes. So in preparation for this presentation, I also thought about what self-care looks like for me. And I see that people are typing things, thank you so much. And I see walking, exercise, therapy as self-care. And we have therapists in the room, which is amazing. I know you know your stuff. Talking with familia, oh my God, familia is important. Being out in nature, hiking, and yes, doing absolutely nothing. So I thought about, how I also self-care. And here's me last Saturday at a drag brunch, moviendo el cuerpo, shaking the body. And for me, self-care is actually about breaking bread in community, about spending time with friends and family in spaces where I feel safe and loved, spaces where I can come as my whole self, as my queer Latina self. And so I also make sure that I do other things as well to restore and to, nourish my body. I take walks. I try to do that. Sometimes, I'll be honest, it can be like 20 minutes because of the way that the week is going. And sometimes it's about 2 hours, depending on what that week is giving me. So some days self-care is a little bit easier than others. But for me, it can look like stepping back, like Richardson was saying, just simply saying, I'm out. I'm going to go ahead and put my feet up and call it a day and just express my gratitude for being here today. And sometimes it's about setting boundaries and resisting some people who are hoping to extract value out of my labor. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. But if I don't know about you, but I don't know if you've been to presentations on self-care over the past year, but we've been going through a lot and it's been really interesting to me. Some people have been adjusting their presentations, but some other folks keep talking about, these 1 to 10 step lists about this is how you self-care. And the reality is that if you're like most Americans, you're probably finding it really difficult to self-care at this point in time, right? Or maybe even before COVID, limited resources, space, maybe a lot of us don't have the time or the energy. And if that is you, I want to say I totally feel you. I know it is hard. And sometimes we feel even like obligated to self-care. Like we have to follow that 1 to 10 list. And we got to acknowledge and be compassionate that sometimes that's really hard. So in the current socioeconomic system, most Americans have to work long hours to survive. And in those long hours, as Manny was saying, Chismeando, yes. Sometimes during those long days, it's difficult to chismear, right? We're just like working and hustling to survive. If you rent an apartment or a home in Sonoma County, if you have children, you probably know what I'm talking about, how difficult it can be to step back. Sometimes folks work long hours simply to make ends meet. And we also, in addition to that, in addition to the hardship that we've experienced in our region because of high, housing costs and all else, we live in a culture that values individuals who press, right? People who are constantly on. The first ones to arrive at the office and the last ones to leave the office. So we value and we admire folks who hustle, who are reachable. If I email you and you get back to me, I celebrate your prompt reply. That's the culture that sometimes we live in. Well, let's just call it, that's the culture that we live in. And we often use phrases like dig deep, like échale, slay, you got it, ándale, si se puede. And even during the weekend, many of us, when we're taking time off from work, when we're trying to rest, we experience that outside voice. I don't know about you, but that outside voice that comes inside and tells you that maybe you shouldn't be resting, that you shouldn't be kicking back. That is the voice of this oppressive system that tells us that we have to grind constantly. I call it the voice of capitalism. Maybe you might call it something different. So the current social structure, which is, I would underline, based on racial capitalism, has created a grind culture that wants us to keep going no matter what. And even in the middle of a global pandemic, we're doing this. We're grinding. And grind culture is the idea that status is achieved by constantly being on and available. And many of us actually wake up and the first thing that we do is we check our email and we start responding, even before we've had breakfast. We live in a culture in which many of the institutions in our county value our labor and our capital, the capital that we can generate the institution, much more than our health and our well-being. So in this culture, we are often a commodity. We're turned into a commodity through which value is extracted. Do you ever feel like that? Or is that just me, right? Like we're stretched thin. And we're often seen as one-dimensional, like our identity is only our professional or occupational position. Like whenever I interact with people, I'm sure that people are like, la doctora Dominguez, la profesora en la Universidad de San Francisco. But I'm also, in addition to being a professor, I'm also a tia, I am also a friend, a volunteer, an activist. So the fact that our system just kind of reduces us to that one dimension can be really detrimental to us. And in this culture, right, productivity is often presented as a function of our worth. So if we produce, we're more valuable. And then what happens is that because we see others participating in this grind culture, sometimes that blocks our voice. Like when we're about to say, you know what, I think I need to push the pause button. Then we start looking around and we're like, well, but my comadre or my compadre or my colleague, they're hustling. So maybe I shouldn't say that because I don't want to be that person who says that I need to rest. And to me, when I describe this society in this way as a grind culture, I hear violence. I hear dehumanization. And so the question is, if this grind culture is violent and it's dehumanizing us, everybody who is under this white supremacy structure, then why do we keep engaging in it? And if you and your institution are already resisting the system, and if this description doesn't fully apply to you, to your institution, to those around you, that's incredible. That's amazing. I celebrate that. I know that many of you are working on this, but I think it would be helpful for us to start kind of amplifying, to dig deeper, right, in this work of healing justice. So let me look real quick at our comments. I have someone say, así es la vida. Yes, así es la vida. It can be really difficult. And así es la vida, we have to think about, okay, so yes, the system of white supremacy is extracting values value out of us. We're stretched really thin. But beyond that, this is having significant repercussions in our health. So why talk about grind culture? Because we need to understand its impact on our physical and our emotional health, as well as its impact in our relationships. So it is interesting that we know from the science that high levels of stress can make the heart rate and our blood pressure increase. It can shoot up. We can actually experience, if that's too high, heart attacks and even heart failure, especially among those of us that have underlying heart conditions. And yet we continue to participate in the system. So the science is out there. People in healing justice circles are telling us, slow down. Audre Lorde is telling us that self-care is an act of political resistance, and we keep grinding. We keep grinding. That's not good for us. And Sonoma County, the thing about it is we're not like other communities, right? Like our unique local community has been through it. And this part really concerns me. So we are dealing with trauma for multiple reasons. So fires, racial injustice, the pandemic, and on top of our own personal experiences, right? Because life still happens. We're still, moms and tias and professors, and we're having to manage and cope with a lot of different other demands and responsibilities. And while we're coping with all of this, with this compounding trauma, again, we're expected to perform. So if we truly want to heal from our trauma, we will need to resist grind culture. So I don't want you to think about self-care again as what the beauty industry tells us self-care is. I want you to see self-care as you actually speaking up for yourself and for your siblings. Because this is not only about me speaking up and saying self-care is an act of political resistance. This is me saying, we got to slow down. We really, truly have to slow down because our society cannot afford for all of us to be unhealthy. We cannot all experience trauma. The system will collapse. It already is. We're starting to see that, right? So we need space, we need time, and we need support. So why work through our trauma? You might be asking. And I come from a family where, like, my grandmother knows that I'm a psychologist, and she's still like, I would much rather at any point in time go to my curandera than see a psychologist. And I'm like, yes, curanderos are still healers, right? Any way you want to see it, whatever you can tap into, but tap into those healing strategies. And if you don't want to do it for you, do it for your children and those around you. Because we know from the field of epigenetics that trauma can actually damage the genes in our cells. And I said that during the last presentation I gave at the Latino Educational Family Summit, that if we're not doing it for us because we don't believe in slowing down, we like to work, we're passionate about the work, then we got to do it for our people. Because that damage that we experience, that trauma that embeds in our bodies can be passed down intergenerationally. It can be passed down from us to our children and then to our children's children. I'm going to repeat that again because I think sometimes people think that that's like soft science, like it's like, oh, trauma, we got to heal. No, this is like proven scientifically that trauma embeds in the body and we can pass it down. So if we don't heal through our trauma right now, then are we really thinking, considering the repercussions that this could have to those we love, for those we love? So we also know that we got to work on our emotional health, because the good news is that just like trauma can be passed down intergenerationally, also resilience can be passed down intergenerationally. So if we work on our emotional health, that's why it's so great that there are some systems of healing that exist that we can tap into, because then that's work that we're doing not only for us, but for those who come next, for future generations. And I know that there are some change makers in the room. I know that some of you are volunteers. That's what I was told, maybe some activists. And for those of us who are doing work on the ground, being good at tracking our own levels of stress and healing through our trauma is particularly important. So for you, self-care must be prioritized because you're likely volunteering or helping on top of everything else that you're doing, right? So maybe volunteering is just another role that you're playing on top of maybe your full-time job or part-time job and all of your other personal and social cultural identities. So for those of you who are helpers, it can be easy to feel like your energy is depleted. Does anybody feel like their energy is somewhat depleted right now? Yeah, like let's own it. And we got to get better at that, right? Because again, grind culture tells us that we got to look like fresh makeup, hair, looking perfect, and no, dark circles under our eyes. But it's inevitable because the system is stretching us. It's stretching. It's pressing. So I know sometimes I do. So we have to practice self-care. And I got to tell you that I'm also practicing right alongside of you. So for those people who are psychologists and they're like, we got this, that's not like, I'll let you into a secret. Like we are all trying to self-care right now. So I have a comment here that says, Profa, as a fourth generation Mexicano from a multi-generational migrant working family, how can I undo what I've learned? Up early, working hard, don't complain, keep working. Yes. Oh man, that resonates with me. And then can we just add the imposter syndrome to that, right? Because in this society that tells us that, our worth is, like in white supremacy culture, in that presentation that I gave recently about white supremacy culture being a racial caste system. And in this caste system, basically, there's more worth assigned to white people and less worth assigned to Black, Indigenous people of color. Within that social structure, then we feel like we have to work super hard to let others see us, to let others appreciate our value. And what I think it's important for us to start changing and thinking about and working through is that we don't have to prove anything to anyone. And I'm going to walk you through an exercise right now so that we can understand that is just a seed that has been planted by white supremacy systems, that we are not worthy enough, that we have to try super hard, that we have to wake up in the morning before everybody else, sweat, and then rest and wake up the next day. And for our people, like what I've been thinking about recently is, and this is not, Danny's idea, this is completely influenced by radical theorists and race theorists, is that to ask ourselves the questions, would my ancestors want me to be working like this? Would my ancestors want me to be grinding to the point where my stress levels are so high that I'm starting to feel sick? Our parents, our grandparents, if you come from a family like we've been discussing right now, they've probably hustled enough for many different generations. So it is okay for us to slow down and resist the system. And we'll walk through that in just a second. Angela Davis, for instance, reminds us that we have lost too many of our visionary leaders and activists to exhaustion, to depression, and to drugs. And I don't want us to lose some of our community members to stress, to illness. So in the process of dismantling these systems of exploitation, we must care for ourselves because social justice work is about longevity. So we need to work through that message that tells us that if we slow down, we're being lazy. Because a lot of us maybe heard that message, right? ¿Qué haces ahí sentado? Don't be sitting down, get up, like clean up. And we got to remember that this is about social justice. This resistance against the system, it is about us trying to fight for a better society. So again, going back to Angela Davis, she said that people power means that we are our own most precious resource. So I see, for instance, here some leaders. I see Magali, for instance. I see her here on my gallery. And for me, it's like she's one of our Latinx leaders, right? She's a precious resource for the community. If she were to get sick, then what would that mean for the movement? So we want all of us to be healthy. We got to take care of ourselves for our own people. We cannot afford to burn ourselves and each other out. Danielle's saying, don't get sick, Magali, please don't. So if we want to fortify our team and our movements for change, we have to be strong and we have to be healthy. And this is especially important if we're working in areas where we hold or serve as a container for people who are coming in and talking to us about their trauma, right? So how do we do it? Danny, that sounds all very beautiful. You're quoting Angela Davis and Audre Lorde, but how do we do it? So there are no quick tips to deprogramming from grind culture. It is a practice. And so we have to start with understanding that we are worthy of rest. Whew. Okay, I'm going to repeat that because it's hard for us sometimes to remember that. We are worthy of rest and we are not machines. Maybe some people want us to be machines, right? Maybe some people want us to be picking crops or want us to get there at 6 o'clock in the morning and send, 20 emails in one day, if not 100. We are not machines. When you say I'm worthy of rest, that is a commitment to dignity, to care, and to justice. So let's practice that right now. So I would love for you to read the next slide slowly with me. And you could just do it with your internal voice. But if you could just say, to heal, I must rest. I am not a machine. I don't have to earn rest. Rest is a primal need. Productivity is not exhaustion. I deserve rest. I am worthy of rest. I don't lose my commitment when I rest. And in many cultures, and I know in the specific Latinx culture where I come from, we were taught to be sacrificial, like to give ourselves away, because that's the thing that we need to do for our families. But with a combination of cultural psychology, counseling across cultures, and other kinds of sciences, we're learning that we can be mindful and respectful of our cultural values while also taking care of our health, and that our abuelitas and our tíos and tías and primos would rather have us be healthy and live a long life than be exhausted and sick. So how did that feel when you were saying that? I learned these words from Tricia Hersey, and I recommend that you look her up. I think sometimes we go to like a lot of psychologists and people who have like their PhDs and PsyDs, but she's got a PhD in the world of napping. So she's known as the napping bishop, the nap bishop. She's amazing. So follow her on Instagram. And whenever you're having a bad day, which when people were raising their hands, I would imagine that this has already been probably a busy week and it's just Wednesday. Just pull her up and go to some of her memes. They're amazing and they will help you restore. So the truth is, we need to be well rested for liberation to happen. That's the summary. We need to be well rested for liberation to happen. The way in which we can actually threaten a system that extracts value from our labor, that exploits us, is to slow down and rest. Because who benefits from us not slowing down? And in a system where a product is prioritized, where our what we do, what we pick, how many emails we send, when that's prioritized and not our relationships, we need to learn how to have difficult conversations with those that are hoping to extract more value from us. And maybe they might be our own colleagues, right? And our society also hasn't taught us how to have these difficult conversations with each other. But we have to lean into those uncomfortable conversations. Because if we want to dismantle the systems of power that exploit us, we need to use rest and relationships as a foundation for the tearing down of the current system in order to build one new system that works for all of us, right? So with Audre Lorde's definition of self-care in mind, I want to ask you the following question. Are you currently using your body to uphold systems of power? In other words, are you actively participating in grind culture? Or are you disrupting it by slowing down and resting? So for instance, here with member Valdenegro, right? He was talking about, and we're talking about a fourth generation Mexicano, about trying to figure out how to maybe integrate these ideas with our culture of pressing. So I think that maybe what we could think about is we're not going to wake up one day and then be perfect at self-care. But maybe the next step is, what is the next right loving thing for you to do for yourself? And what I can, I can't guarantee, but I'm pretty confident that your family, the people who love you, those around you are going to appreciate that. So ask yourself this question. Do you use your body to uphold systems of power or to disrupt them? So I want us to just listen to our queen, to Angela Davis, about her ideas about self-care.
Anyone who's interested in making change in the world also has to learn how to take care of herself, himself, their selves. For a long time, activists did not necessarily think that it mattered to take care of themselves in terms of what they eat, in terms of mental self-care, corporal self-care, spiritual self-care. I know that there were some people who emphasized it. I'm thinking about one of the leaders of the Black Panther Party, Erica Huggins, who began to practice yoga and meditation in the 70s. And she encouraged many people, including Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, to join that practice. I think they did a little bit of it, but I think our movement would have been very different had we understood the importance of that kind of self-care. Personally, I started practicing yoga and meditation when I was in jail, but it was more of an individual practice. Later, I had to recognize the importance of emphasizing the collective character of that work on the self. Well, it means that we're able to bring our entire selves into the movement. It means that we incorporate into our work as activists ways of acknowledging and hopefully also moving beyond trauma. It means a holistic approach, I think. I think longevity is important, and not simply individual longevity. It is equally important to recognize that as we develop our movement today, we're creating a terrain for the emergence of new activists. And what we do today has an impact on what younger people will be able to do tomorrow. I think we have to imagine ourselves as connected to people who came before us and to those who will come after us. Black people all over the world have been subjected to the most unimaginable forms of violence, slavery, torture. But at the same time, and this is what Black people have offered the world, we've also produced beauty, music, and art. And I think that the self-care that gets produced by Black people recognizes the connection between struggle and art and beauty and the imagination. Anyone who
Okay. So if there is an appropriate example of commitment to dignity, to care, and to justice, and how it must be ongoing, I think that that is Angela Davis, right? We've seen her for years and years be the amazing, radical, fierce woman that she is. But the truth is that we are not Angela Davis, right? And what I see in my clinical practice is that often I see folks who are coming in to counseling because they're feeling burnout. And it's not just exhaustion, it's more than that. And it becomes clear that burnout is in some ways kind of like associated with a different pattern where we crash, then we rest, then we recover, and then we crash again. So it's almost like very circular. So after my clients rest, sometimes, not everybody, they go back to participating in grind culture. So again, the practice of self-care must be ongoing. If we really want to build bigger, bolder, more resilient systems, we have to do this consistently. So where do we start? For those of you who might be thinking, well, Danny, I'm interested in figuring out how to use my body as a tool for liberation. Where do I start? Well, my suggestion is first to just turn inward and to turn into yourself and ask, what do I need right now? And I know that this is really simple, but I don't think that we often do it, where we just stop and we say, what do I need right now? We're multitasking, right? Like right now, maybe some of you are listening to the presentation while you're checking emails, or maybe you're like texting someone else. And maybe for you, that's like actually managing and trying to coordinate things because that's the way in which you need to take care of yourself. And that's totally okay. But there needs to be space in which we can create some silence where we actually turn to ourselves and ask, what do I need? And then again, do the next right loving thing. And again, why do this? Because we need you. I see here that member Valdenegro said, for instance, well, we know this world. Yeah, we definitely know this world. I couldn't agree more. Like, I know exactly the world that we live in. We all have different experiences, but we know what we're up against. But does it have to be that way? So if you are not okay with the world being this way, and you want your body to be used as a tool for liberation, then we need you. And your health is a critical component for this movement for social justice. And yes, it will look very different during the pandemic. We've had to figure out a way to adapt self-care, but it is necessary, right? What else can you do? Maybe trying to reconnect with your purpose. So when I wake up in the morning, and I'm not saying that the way that I do it, it's perfect. All of us will have our own little strategies. But when I wake up in the morning, the first thing that I ask is, to what end? Like, why engage in the work that I do? Because the truth is that all of you, and I don't know your positions, but probably you could be, if you work in government or if you're, into community organizing, maybe you could be tapping into other sources of revenue, right? Like maybe you could be making much more money, or maybe you could be working fewer hours. But why do you choose to do it? To what end? So I think that reconnecting with that purpose of what are the values that guide my work? Why did I choose to have this job in particular? Why am I choosing to volunteer? What is my enduring sense of purpose? Could probably be helpful in helping us kind of ground ourselves, anchor ourselves. And if you're having trouble remembering this purpose, what I would recommend is that you reach out, that you reach back, and that you reach forward. So what do I mean by that? Reach out, go to the people that you love, if you have forgotten what that purpose is, and ask, hey, do you remember why I got this job? Because sometimes we might be like, why did I get this job? Ask, do you remember what brought me into that role in the first place? Reaching back could also be maybe talking to your ancestors, talking to people that, have paved the way, and asking for more clarity about why it is that you're choosing to be on this path. And reaching forward is to also imagine what your life would look like if you were more passionate about the work again. So just reconnecting with that purpose. So again, in a society that is not prioritizing our healing. Deprogramming involves repeating things over and over again. So let's summarize what self-care is. So self-care is a framework and series of practices. It's an exercise. It's not something that we wake up with. It's something that we need to try out. It is about centering yourself in a world that doesn't encourage you to step back or to step aside. So with some of the mamas, for instance, that I work with, I know that this is something that comes up frequently, like the feeling guilty about self-caring, right? Because you could be doing something else. So self-care is about learning that you don't have to be everywhere at once. And I know that that comes from a place of privilege as someone who doesn't have children. But again, we have to take care of ourselves. It's like, again, that analogy of the airport, the plane mask, right? You got to put it on first before you take care of your children. So it is also important for us to understand that we cannot just say, I'll take care of everything, and then as an add-on, I'm going to take care of myself. You have to take care of yourself first, and then take care of others for sustainability. So your children, your friends, and those you love, I know would want you to live a healthy life. Self-care is not about being selfish, but the truth is that self-care is actually about community care. And I think that this is where we start feeling more comfortable, right? Because again, as a Latinx woman, sometimes it's difficult for me to think about self-care. But one of the biggest enemies of social justice movements is burnout. So our community, the movement, needs us to be practicing this. So I'll give you a story. In 2010, I was completing my 4th year at San Antonio's Rape Crisis Center, where I provided counseling services to survivors of sexual assault. And I was working with little ones that had experienced sexual assault. And I'll be honest, I really got to the point where I felt like if someone added one more person to my client caseload, that I was going to get physically sick. And that's what happens when you hold on to other people's trauma. And I know that some of you are actually doing that right now. So that year in 2010, I was constantly experiencing like rapid heart palpitations. I was having trouble sleeping. I was hypervigilant, like constantly looking around. And my younger sister, when she visited me from Mexico that year, she said, like, hermana, like, I am worried about you. You look exhausted. And as the kind sister that she is, she did it, of course, really well, because I've talked to people about how I like to receive feedback. And so I tell her, you need to tell me something, like just be gentle, right? So she did it with a lot of love, which was really helpful because then I could listen actively to what she needed to tell me. And as she was talking, I realized that I wasn't just exhausted, that I was actually burnt out. And I couldn't necessarily like actually absorb the information that my clients were telling me. So I was not being helpful to my clients. I was not a pleasant person to be around. And so I had to reconnect with my purpose, right? And maybe it will help if we define burnout first. So burnout is more than just exhaustion that comes from working too hard. Burnout is often paired with frustration and a loss of connection to pleasure and passion in the work and activities we perform. So if you have felt burnout, what does it look like for you? When you're like, whew, I think I'm there. How do you know that? Do you have like a pink flag that tells you, you're about to get there? What is your red flag? When do you know it's time? I'm officially burnt out. So, yeah, I see people say, I can't get out of bed when you're already sick. Yes. And this is also really dangerous for those of us that have chronic illnesses, right? Because then that puts us in a really vulnerable position. And what sucks is also that burnout and overworked people have the potential to cause harm to others and also to the movement, right? The movement for social justice. And we've seen this with some activists that sometimes they're at a point where they're burnt out and then they start getting snappy, and that doesn't help anyone. If we want to welcome enough people to our movements, to volunteer, to engage in mutual aid, and really transform our world, we have to make the experience of volunteering, of being in mutual aid, irresistible. So if you want to bring people into your circle and say, volunteer, then what do you need to convey? Like, what is the energy that you need to put out there? Because in fact, justice work is irresistible, right? Like once you get on it, it's really difficult to stop. But we want to attract people to our movement if we're looking exhausted. Like, why would we want to do that? If I see you exhausted, would I really want to work at your institution, at your organization? So if you're leading a team, remember that institutions don't start movements. So you're building, the little sign that people see when they're driving around, that won't start the movement, that won't get the work done, but the people in your team will. So how do you help create spaces for healing? So let's pause and read this together. Centering myself disrupts the status quo. Me as a brown woman who's an immigrant, who has seen her grandmother, her mother, her father hustle, slowing down is disrupting the status quo. Centering myself is good for the movement. Centering myself is good for those who love me. And centering myself is required to heal. So poet Young Pueblo encourages us to heal ourselves. He said, heal yourself, not just so you can thrive, but to ensure that people who cross your path in the future are safer from harm. So if you're a leader, you got to heal yourself because there are a lot of people under you. So how can you prevent burnout from happening in your team? So first, recognizing that the conditions creating a culture of overwork have to be like brought to the surface. You have to shed light on those conditions creating a culture of overwork. So ask yourself, are we affirming all aspects of someone's identity? Who they are as partners, who they are as parents, as family members, etc. Do we understand that they are more than just our colleagues who come from 8 to 5? It would also help to create opportunities for social connection. So if you're a leader and are creating opportunities for social connection and people are not showing up, which I'll be honest, there are times when like where I work, they will have like happy hours and things like that. And sometimes I just don't want to show up because too much extraction has already happened. So I don't want to dedicate more time to that. But it would be really helpful if the institution could turn and ask, hey, what can we do so that next time you can actually feel like really excited about showing up? So being transparent in how you can work together is also critically important. You have to ask, are our interactions as a team replicating the kind of community that we hope to create? So in this process of creating a new system in which people are liberated, a community that is in line with our values, a community that really is able to care for each other, even and especially in moments of crises, is that community already existing in my institution? Keeping it 100, like asking yourself that question, right? And we also have to be honest about the conditions in which our people are volunteering, if we have volunteers there. So for instance, when I go down to the border, I take students to Matamoros in Mexico to work with migrants and asylum-seeking families. And before we actually go out there, I keep it very real with them about what they might see, about how hot it might be, how sometimes it might be difficult to find resources, how we need to take care of ourselves with water, with food, how can we nourish our bodies, and then they get to decide what they're gonna get into, right? So are we being truly transparent with the people who work under us about what they're getting into? Or do we just wanna bring them into the circle? Do we just wanna hire folks to fill those positions? Then fourth, encourage others to rest and eat. I have one colleague who, when we start meeting, so she identifies as Chinese, she's second generation Chinese. And instead of saying, how are you all doing? Good morning. She just asks, have you eaten today? As simple as that. So as a team, how are you considering all the ways that your bodies need to be nourished in those high intensity moments? So in my culture, in Latinx culture, the first thing that my grandmother and mother ask when I walk into the room is, "Mijita, ya comiste? Have you eaten?" Same thing. So why are we not doing that in our workplace? How can we treat our coworkers like our families treat us? How can we replicate within our institution the types of communities that we want to create? Then the fifth point is to create opportunities for appreciation and celebration. Like, we need a ton of celebration. One of the things that I love doing is going to Sonoma Valley Cinco de Mayo. I love to celebrate. And folks, we need to celebrate the small victories. Celebration keeps hope going, keeps us, recharged and restored. And for our team, when we gather and celebrate, we stay connected to our team's purpose. And so the sixth point is to create a culture where it is okay to give and receive feedback. And that's something that I have kind of, in conversations with people that I frequently work with, that I say, can you just make sure that you let me know if I say something that harms you, that hurts you, that wounds you, to the extent that you can. And just giving people permission to give us feedback can be very healing. So now let's finish the presentation by talking about boundary setting, right? Because that's what we often struggle with. So when your team or institution is getting ready to launch into emergency responses, what kinds of conversations are you having with each other to take care of each other's health? So how do you decide who goes out to the field, who takes care of maybe some responsibilities? Think about that for just a second. Edgeris Dixon and Dove Kent, those are two experts on adapting strategy and building power in crisis. They encourage us to ask our team members the following two questions to decide who is the appropriate person for the job. So they tell us that we need to ask our people, the people who are volunteering, who feels ready and clear about the purpose of our mission. Because sometimes it's cloudy, right? Especially right now when we're so tired. We got to ask, out of all of us, who feels ready and clear, not foggy, but clear about the purpose of our mission? Or who feels foggy, ambivalent, tired, and stuck? I don't know about you, but I'm rarely asked those questions. We just launch and then we struggle. Right? So slowing down and asking these questions is important. Those who feel ready and clear about the purpose of the mission, then they can lead that initiative and they probably will be much more effective. So boundaries. Yasmin Cheyenne, a wellness coach based in the US, she's great at explaining boundary setting. And I don't know about you, but I need like easy analogies to understand complex ideas. And for someone like me who kind of falls into default thinking of grind culture, I need to like clearly grasp the concept of boundary setting because I've been pretty bad at it. So she tells a story of how one day, due to a variety of personal experiences, she started thinking about how it felt to have people not respect her boundaries. And she talked about feeling like she was like a sugar jar in a kitchen. So just picture that for a second, follow me. So she said, think about the kitchen being your personal space. So she thought the kitchen's my personal space. The jar is my boundaries. And the sugar inside of that jar, the sweet stuff, was her energy, her time, her money, and her availability. And at that point in her life, she shares that she felt like people were coming into her space. So figuratively, her kitchen, right? They were coming into her kitchen over and over again, just basically taking like scoops full of sugar from the jar. And again, the sugar being figuratively her energy. And while they would scoop it, then all of that sugar would disperse around the floor, leaving her like tired and exhausted and overwhelmed, used, unseen, not heard, alone. And she said that no matter what she did, no therapy or journaling or walking could restore her energy, her sugar, because people just simply came coming for that sugar. Do you ever feel like that? Where you're like, I need people to stop coming for my sugar. Like, please, just a little bit of time. So before she could get that cup in, to put in through like therapy or walking to replenish her jar, someone was already waiting there with a scoop to take some of that sugar out. So she said, we sometimes think that we have multiple jars because we have different identities. So there's a jar for when I'm a student, and there's a jar for when I'm a volunteer, and one for when I'm a mom. But the truth is that we only have one jar. But this white supremacy culture has taught us that that things are very linear, right? So we only have one jar because there's only one of us. So everything has to come out of that jar. And sometimes the problem is that we compare ourselves to others. Like we look around and we're like, dang, like this person is doing this and that and that and that. And I know, Magali, you asked me like during last presentation, like, how do you do all of that? And I said, well, I have a roof over my head. I don't have children. I don't know, like, and some of us have, like, our jars can be a little bit larger than others. And certainly, like, my jar is not as big as other activists or other organizers or some other people. So we should not be comparing ourselves to other folks whose jars are like super large, right? So she teaches us about the importance of putting lids on our jars and requiring others to ask permission before they can come in to our kitchen, and definitely before they can take any sugar. So teaching people to respect, and sometimes we have to demand, teaching them to respect our boundaries around how much of our energy they can take is boundary setting. And that is the healthy thing to do. So as a Black woman, one of the things that she talks about is that history has made people feel like they are entitled to taking as much sugar as they want from people of color. And that is going to be especially hard for us to be doing, to put a lid on that jar and to say, at this point in time, you don't have permission to come in and get some of the sugar, that is okay. So that's the presentation. Self-care is community care. And a part of us engaging in community care is thinking about our own healing processes as an act of resistance, as an act of resisting this grind culture that is making us pretty sick. And just like, I'll end with saying that I think, like, I'm confident 100% that we can do it. I'm 100% confident that if we wanted to, we could do it. We just have to learn. It's a practice. Again, it's not something that we're born with. It is a skill that we have to build. So thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate you all. And then I'll turn it over to Danielle again.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dominguez. That was a fantastic presentation. I am now going to turn it over to the members of our board who are present to see if you have any questions for Dr. Dominguez. No? Oh, Chair Graves.
Hi, I just want to say thank you so much. I realized that my camera was off for that, and please don't take that any way other than I was doing a little self-care. I actually had a little bit of dinner. That was my that was my treat this evening, was to eat a little bit earlier, and just really was trying to absorb everything. I find sometimes on Zoom that I see myself on that camera, and I'm distracted by how's my hair? Oh my God, those glasses are awful. All of these things, these negative self-talk in my head. So I wanted it off so that I could really listen to you. And I found everything that you were saying was wonderful. Maybe a little too self-reflective. We'll find out next week if I'm still doing one of the things that I was thinking about not doing starting next week. And I really enjoyed your analogies. Where do you get your information? I mean, it sounds like when you're a student, always in your life, so you're probably reading and listening and actively taking in information, but all of these were all very new to me. Some of these quotes, some of these sayings. And so you mentioned one that is on Instagram, but where's some other things, because I thought they were so wonderful.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. And It's interesting because one of the things that helps me about having like one foot in academia and teaching, like what I call the white ivory tower, right? Where things are like really academic-y and people use all of these fancy words. And sometimes I'm like, what does that mean? And then having like one foot in community is that I've realized, and I said this in other presentations, and I've learned this from community organizers, that community organizers are way ahead of us with analogies and with understandings because they're deeply rooted in community. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do is like, I will read and write for academic purposes. And then also I find that a lot of the things that really replenish my soul is actually learning from organizers on the ground. And so a lot of these people come from organizing backgrounds, healing justice movements, emergent strategies. So, people who are thinking about building new systems. And so there is this podcast that I really recommend, and it's called Irresistible. And it's about community organizers, healers, people in movement spaces coming together and trying to help us understand why it is so important for us to heal ourselves. Because I think sometimes people think that folks who are hoping to kind of, when people talk about like disrupting and dismantling, maybe some folks think like, oh my God, there's so much like anger in that. And there's so much, and we talk about, different emotions being really helpful for us to kind of propel the movement forward. And a part of that is also being like gentle with ourselves. And so that podcast in itself talks a lot about how to heal from some of the struggles that we've encountered. And also, I really like to learn from within the healing space, trans women of color, Black, Indigenous women of color, because of their own experiences and the intersectionality of their struggles, of who they are, they have a very unique perspective. And so I find that they're often underrepresented in academic spaces. And so Irresistible is one of those. And then also The Good Ancestor, Leila Saad's work is beautiful. And so anything that she quotes and references, you will more than likely see me cite it in my presentations. But thank you, I appreciate it. I'm so glad that you're self-caring. And I see there's a question as well there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Roberts, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Dominguez. I just want to say thank you as well, and I appreciated a different take that I'm used to on self-care. Also, I want to say I had my video off as well, but the reason was because it always seemed to freeze when I was mid-blink or making some funny face. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Member Roberts. I appreciate it. And thank you for being here. I think it's important for us just also thinking from different social cultural identities and, however it is that people identify. There, I think, different ideas about who's entitled to self-care and who's not entitled to self-care. And I think that because of these dominant social discourses about what self-care is and people thinking that it's about like putting face masks on, or sometimes, male identified folks might think that this is just not for them, that it's too soft. And it's actually really important that all of us learn about self-care. So I'm glad to see different identities in the room.
All right. Let's see. I see Member Richardson actually unmuted herself. Did you want to ask a question or?
I just wanted to appreciate your grandma who may not want to go to a mental health healer, but to a traditional healer. Or I know in my profession as a mental health professional, I work with a lot of people of different cultures and spiritual practices, and they utilize that as well. And also I appreciate the presentation and the fact that we have to be reminded, and I feel like sometimes given permission to take care of ourselves as moms and spouses or partners or aunts. My daughter's looking at me. Today's her birthday. We need to give ourselves that permission to just do nothing as
Yeah.
part of self-care.
Yes, and I love that, like just doing nothing, you know. And congratulations to your daughter, and I'm glad that you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you for acknowledging my grandmother. She's like an amazing ancestor, and so I've learned a lot from her. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other members? I see Magali. I just want to make sure other members. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Dominguez. It's just always like every time I learn something new, well, many somethings new, and I just want to audit all of your classes pretty much. But having said that, you know, for especially women of color that work in institutions, you know, you reference grind culture, right? And I think the pandemic has especially affected women of color in leadership and women of color in these sort of spaces that we've not traditionally been in. So what sort of, do you have any specific advice or some language around, you know, how do you talk to these systems that value, you know, grinding and to some extent, you know, I think, I know I can speak for myself. I value it because I get sort of like this instant gratification, right? And to Member Valdenegro's point, growing up where it's just like hustle, 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 get up, go, go, go. You know, how do you, well, one, I know it's untraining yourself, but as a person of color in a position of leadership and in an institution, do you have any sort of like specific thoughts and advice around that?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to suck, but it's like there's a part of me that really first wants to, because there's like no, you know, concrete answer, but one is just like normalizing how difficult it can be to be a woman in a position of power in a patriarchal system. And I know that people are like, oh, here we go, Danny, with her patriarchy and her. No, but truly, you know, it's to be a woman and also a woman of color in a position of leadership, it can be very challenging. And I've had conversations with people around how sometimes it feels like we frequently have to be like tiptoeing around because, you know, people are ready to maybe pull you down from those positions of power. And so first, like normalizing and validating how difficult it can be to constantly feel like you have to perform to keep that position, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is to try to also understand, and this is really difficult, but that we in ways are also paving the path for those that are coming along. And so I would imagine that maybe you already have people who are working with you, maybe in collaboration. And so to model that, to be a Latinx woman in a position of leadership, that the way that you execute power is going to look very different from the way in which other people execute power. So one of the things that, you know, I've seen is, and a lot of authors have written about this, again, critical race theories, about how there's a tendency when they do an analysis of men who have been in positions of power to hoard power. And when they do an analysis of the ways in which women execute power, there's power sharing. And so if we start doing it, and then people start learning from us about the benefits of sharing power, of being much more relational, of you know, the idea of how much, like, I truly believe that we could be more creative and more innovative when people rest, when people sleep, when people take care of themselves. So when we actually start engaging in that practice, it's going to be very, I think, difficult for people to not see the value of us prioritizing that relational aspect. And so I would say we kind of have to brace for the repercussions that the system's going to have, because boundary setting has repercussions and consequences, right? When you say, no, I'm sorry, I don't think that I can do that right now because I have to go pick up my daughter from theater, from ballet or whatever, then maybe they might think, well, when I hired her, I told her that she needed to do this and that and that and that. There are repercussions and consequences of us exercising our boundaries, but then also people are looking and our daughters are looking, and so we have to kind of come to terms with what are we willing to sacrifice to tear down the system and create a new one that works for all of us.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and open it up to members of our audience. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, and we'll be able to unmute you and have you ask your question. Any of our vistas have anything that they want to ask? I see all three of them out there. All right. Well, it looks like there's no questions from our audience. Any other comments, follow-up questions from the board before we wrap up? All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Dominguez, for your presentation and for your time with us this evening. As always, it was amazing, and I truly appreciate it. There were several times where I found myself just giggling a little bit because I recognized myself in what you were saying, like the whole sugar jar thing and people taking from your jar. Just today, I was trying to get something very important done for Magali, and my husband and my daughter kept coming in and interrupting me. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys are killing me. Leave me alone. I've had to tell you this repeatedly over and over again. So when you were talking about that, that just made me giggle a little bit. But yeah, thank you.
And I love that because it's like saying that, voicing that is like, okay, we exist within a system where we're also mothers and partners and not just someone who works for Magali, right?
Yeah, exactly. Thank you again so much. We appreciate it. And hopefully we can have you back in the future.
Thank you. Have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so I know Chair Graves had one additional thing that she wanted to say before we conclude the meeting for this evening.
Yeah, I thank you everybody for indulging me in this. Unplanned, but given the scope of everything that we were just presented with and we were absorbing, I really wanted to make mention of Member Harper. And if you don't know, last week it became public knowledge through, I believe it was his sister, that he is ill, that he's not doing well, and that at this point we don't know when he is going to be able to do well. There is some information about how we can write a thank you note and his address, and I'm sorry I don't have that right here to include in the chat. But being that Member Harper is one of the most committed, community-oriented change makers that I know in our community, and many other people know. I would like us to take a moment of silence and send him a radiation, radiating all of the powerful energy and healing energy that we may have in that moment of silence, in hopes that his health can be better moving forward. I know everybody has distinct relationships with Member Harper. I can remember a few months ago when he shared his story with us. I hope that we can all reflect on that. Danielle just put the information where we can write a get well card and our best wishes to him. I hope that you all take advantage of that, that you help to spread the word, and that the avalanche of well wishes and healing thoughts help him to recover quickly.
Thank you, Chair Graves. Thank you, everyone who was able to make it tonight. There will be the recording of the presentation available hopefully tomorrow or by the end of the week on the website. And we will see you next month, June 23rd at 6 p.m. All right. Thank you.